The spaceport of Draloth Station was never quiet. Ships came and went every hour, carrying merchants, travelers, and workers from many different planets. The air was filled with the sound of engines, the smell of different foods, and the chatter of hundreds of languages. It was a place where deals were made, where fortunes rose and fell, and where thousands of lives crossed paths for a moment before separating again. Among all this noise and movement, a small human food stall stood on the edge of the market square. It was not big, and it did not shine like the wealthy restaurants owned by other species. It was simple: a counter made of metal, a cooking unit behind it, and a warm smell of fresh bread, soup, and roasted vegetables drifting into the air. The humans who ran it were new to the galaxy, but they had quickly learned that the easiest way to be accepted was to offer food. Everyone, no matter what planet they came from, needed to eat. Behind the counter stood Jonas Hale, a tall human with tired eyes but a friendly smile. He had been working on the station for 3 months, selling meals to whoever could afford them. Some aliens bought his food because it was cheap, others because they were curious about human cooking, and a few because they actually liked the taste. Jonas did not earn much, but he was proud of his little stall. It was his way of showing the galaxy who humans were. On this day, Jonas was wiping the counter when he noticed a figure standing at the edge of the crowd. It was a woman, though not human. Her skin was pale blue and her eyes were large and dark, shining softly under the station's lights. Her clothes were torn and faded, showing that she had traveled long and hard. Her shoulders bent under an invisible weight and her steps were slow. In her arms she carried a small child, even thinner than she was. The woman stood still for a moment, as if unsure whether to step closer. People walked past her without a glance. Some merchants turned their faces away. A pair of guards at the far corner looked at her with disapproval, as though she was something they did not want to see. Finally, she gathered her courage and moved toward the stall. Jonas noticed how her hands trembled, how the child clung to her neck. The boy's eyes were half closed, his face pale with hunger. The woman stopped in front of Jonas and lowered her head. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the noise of the market, but Jonas heard every word. "Please," she said, her throat dry. "May I have the leftovers? For my child? He has not eaten in 4 days." The words struck Jonas like a stone. He looked at her face, then at the boy's weak arms around her. He had seen poverty before, both on Earth and on the station, but this was different. This was not just need, it was desperation. For a moment, Jonas glanced at the pot behind him. It was almost empty. The food inside was meant for paying customers. If he gave it away, he would lose money. He might not even have enough to cover tomorrow's supplies. Other merchants on the station would have turned her away without a second thought. Some might have even called security to remove her. But Jonas was human. He set down the cloth in his hand and reached for a clean bowl. He filled it carefully with the warm stew that remained, adding more than he would for a regular customer. Then he took a piece of bread, fresh from the oven, and placed it on top. The woman looked at him with wide eyes as if she did not believe what she was seeing. Jonas smiled gently and pushed the bowl toward her. "No leftovers," he said softly. "A proper meal, for both of you." The child lifted his head and sniffed the air, his eyes suddenly brighter. The mother's lips trembled and tears filled her dark eyes. She tried to speak, but no words came. Instead, she bowed deeply, her arms tightening around her son. Jonas waved his hand. "No need for thanks, just eat. He needs strength." The woman sat on the nearest bench, holding the bowl carefully as if it were treasure. She fed her son first, spoon by spoon, watching as life slowly returned to his face. The boy chewed slowly, then faster, his hunger stronger than his weakness. Every time he swallowed, the mother's shoulders relaxed a little more, relief flowing through her tired body. Only after the child was full did she take a bite herself, closing her eyes as the warm food touched her tongue. Around them, people began to notice. A group of alien traders stopped to watch. A tall, insect-like being tilted its head curiously. 2 young workers whispered to each other, surprised at what they saw. On this station, kindness was rare. Food was never given without payment. To share it with someone who had nothing was almost unthinkable. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. The human gave food away. Did you see that? To a stranger? Strange people, these humans. Jonas heard them, but he did not care. He only cared that the boy was eating, that the woman's face no longer carried only pain. When they were finished, the woman carried the empty bowl back to the stall. She held it close like something sacred and placed it gently on the counter. I have no words, she whispered. No one else listened. No one else saw us. You are the first. Jonas looked at her and shook his head. You don't need words. Just take care of your child, that's all that matters. The boy looked up at Jonas and gave a small smile, weak but real. It was the kind of smile that needed no translation. The woman bowed again and turned to leave, holding her son more tightly than before. Her steps were still slow, but they no longer dragged with despair. Jonas watched them disappear into the crowd. He felt the loss of the food he had given, but in his heart he knew it was the right choice. What he did not know was that many eyes had seen, and many ears had heard. The small act he thought unimportant would soon ripple across the station. Some would call him foolish, some would call him dangerous, but others would remember the warmth of a human's kindness. And somewhere deep inside the vast station, among the forgotten and the poor, a new story began to take shape. It was not a story of trade or power, but of compassion, a story that would one day change the way the stars looked at humanity. The next day at Drayloth Station, life moved as it always did. Ships landed, traders shouted prices, and workers hurried through crowded corridors. Yet under all the noise, a small story had already started to move from ear to ear. It was about the human food stall and the woman who had begged for scraps but walked away with a full meal. Jonas Hale, the stall owner, was busy again that morning. He was stirring a large pot of vegetable stew, letting the warm smell rise through the market. Business was slow in the early hours, but he didn't mind. He was thinking about the woman and her child. He wondered if they were safe, if the boy was feeling better. What Jonas didn't know was that his simple act of kindness was already being discussed. A group of insectoid traders were whispering near their storage crates, a pair of reptilian. Workers argued quietly, one calling the humans foolish, the other curious. Even the guards at the corner had mentioned it once or twice, shaking their heads in disbelief. On Drayloth Station, generosity was almost unknown. Trade ruled everything. Every action was measured in value. To give away food without receiving something in return was strange, almost unnatural. And because it was so unusual, people could not stop talking about it. By midday, Jonas noticed something new. A few aliens came to his stall not to buy, but to look at him. Some stared with suspicion, as though trying to figure out his motives. Others studied his hands while he served customers, as if hoping to understand what kind of person would do what he had done. Jonas gave them polite nods, but he could feel the weight of their eyes. Later, while he was serving a bowl of soup to a miner, he saw her again, the pale blue woman. This time she walked with a little more strength. The child held her hand and looked brighter than before, his steps less heavy. She stopped at his stall, bowed, and placed a small cloth bag on the counter. I have nothing of worth, she said softly, but I found these seeds in the waste of an abandoned garden dome. Perhaps you can use them. Jonas opened the bag and saw tiny dried seeds, vegetable seeds. On Earth, they would not mean much, but on a space station where fresh food was rare, they were valuable. He looked back at her and smiled. Thank you. But you don't owe me anything. The woman shook her head. Kindness must be answered, even if only with something small. My people have little, but we still believe this. Jonas accepted the seeds, not because he needed them, but because he understood that for her this was important. She was showing that she had not come to take without giving. He bowed slightly in return. The child smiled at him again before they left, and Jonas felt warmth in his chest. That evening, when Jonas closed the stall, He walked through the market and noticed groups of aliens whispering. He caught a few words. The human gave food, strange kindness. Some voices carried doubt, others curiosity. A few sounded almost hopeful. One insectoid trader clicked his mandibles and spoke to his partner. They act as if loss is nothing, yet the child lived. Is that not strength? The words lingered in Jonas's mind. Strength. Most species on the station measured strength in wealth, in weapons, in power. But here was one alien questioning if kindness itself could be strength. The next day, the ripple grew larger. A small line formed near Jonas's stall, not of regular customers, but of those who had little. An old reptilian with tired eyes asked if Jonas had anything cheap, even just bread crusts. A group of thin children from another species hovered nearby, their stomachs growling. Jonas faced a choice. If he gave away too much, he would lose his supplies. Yet he could not turn them away, not after what he had seen in the boy's eyes the day before. So he tried something different. He set aside a portion of his stew in a large pot marked shared meal. From this pot, anyone who could not pay was given a small bowl. It was not much, but it was enough. The old reptilian ate slowly, whispering thanks. The children devoured their portions with joy. Soon word spread further. Humans were sharing food, not just selling it. Other merchants noticed, and many were not pleased. A tall avian stall owner glared at Jonas across the square. Later, she confronted him. "You are ruining trade," she hissed. "If you give away food, others will expect the same. Do you want us all to starve?" Jonas stayed calm. "I don't want anyone to starve. Not even the poorest child should go 4 days without food. If sharing a little saves lives, then I will do it." The avian merchant shook her feathers angrily and left, muttering about foolish humans. But others who overheard said nothing, their eyes thoughtful. That night, in the dim lights of a worker's dormitory, the pale blue woman told her story. She described how a human had listened when no one else did, how her child had been given food without price. Other families, poor and forgotten, listened with wide eyes. Some felt hope for the first time in years. One worker asked, "Why would humans do this? What do they gain?" The woman answered softly, "Perhaps they gain nothing. Perhaps that is why it is powerful." In the following days, the ripple turned into a wave. Refugees and struggling workers gathered near the human district, drawn by the promise of food and dignity. Jonas and the few humans with him worked harder, cooking larger pots, stretching their supplies as far as they could. The woman and her child began helping too. She washed bowls, the boy carried water. They were not beggars anymore, they were part of something. And every time she handed a steaming bowl to another hungry person, she felt a quiet pride. The market buzzed with arguments. Some aliens said humans were weak, wasting resources on strangers. Others said humans were dangerous, spreading ideas that could break the old order. But some began to admire them, whispering that perhaps humanity brought something the galaxy had forgotten. Even the guards, once cold and distant, watched more carefully now. They did not stop the humans, but they did not protect them either. They were waiting, unsure which way the wind would blow. Jonas lay awake one night in his small quarters, thinking. He knew they could not keep feeding everyone forever. Supplies were limited. Yet he also knew something larger was happening. Each bowl of food was more than just survival. It was a message. It was proof that another way was possible. He thought of Earth, of how humans had always helped each other in hard times. He remembered stories of neighbors sharing bread during storms, of strangers giving shelter in disasters. Perhaps, he thought, this was what humanity could bring to the stars. Not wealth, not power, but compassion. And he wondered, if such a small act could ripple so far, what would happen when the galaxy truly understood what it meant to be human? By the end of that week, the spaceport was no longer the same. It was still noisy, still busy, but there was a new current flowing through it. A story moved among the crowds, carried in whispers and glances. The humans share food. Some said it with scorn. Some said it with fear, but many said it with quiet hope. And for the pale blue woman and her child, who had once been invisible, life was no longer only about survival. They had become symbols, proof of what a simple act of kindness could awaken in a place where kindness had been forgotten. The crowd around the human stall grew larger every day. At first it had been only the pale blue woman and her child, then a few workers, then families who had nothing. Now a whole corner of the market near the human district was filled with people waiting. Some came to buy, but many came hoping for a share of the free pot Jonas and his companions always prepared. The sight was unusual. On Drayloth Station, the poor usually hid in shadowed corners or lived in the lower decks far from the market. But here they stood openly, drawn by the promise of food. And wherever they gathered, whispers followed. Some aliens admired it quietly. A worker said to his friend, "If humans can give food with empty hands, then maybe we have been wrong to ignore those in need." Others were less kind. A merchant scoffed, "They are feeding parasites. Soon the whole station will think humans are fools." Jonas Hale knew that tension was rising. He saw it in the stares, in the way some merchants began closing their stalls earlier than usual, in the way guards walked slower when passing the crowd. Still, he did not stop. Every day he and the other humans cooked as much as they could afford, giving meals to those who needed them most. The pale blue woman, whose name Jonas finally learned was Lyra, worked beside them now. Her child Kieran carried water and helped, wiped tables with a proud smile. They were not beggars anymore, they were helpers. Their presence gave courage to others. One afternoon, while Jonas was serving stew to a group of children, 2 station officials approached. Their uniforms were dark gray, marked with silver stripes. The crowd grew quiet as they stopped in front of the stall. The taller official, a reptilian with sharp golden eyes, spoke firmly. "Human," he said, "you must stop this at once." Jonas put down the ladle and faced them calmly. "Stop what?" "Stop feeding these people," the official replied. "You are disrupting order. The lower-class population is supposed to remain in their sector. By drawing them here, you create trouble. Already merchants complain that their businesses are suffering." Jonas frowned. Are they suffering, or are they angry because people prefer to stand here instead of buying from them? The reptilian's eyes narrowed. That does not matter. What matters is balance. On this station, everything has a place. The strong trade, the weak endure. You are upsetting this balance. The second official, a thin avian with a sharp beak, added, "If you continue, you may face penalties. Think carefully, human. You are new to this station. You do not want trouble." For a moment, Jonas considered staying silent. But then he thought of Lyra, of Kieran's smile when he finally ate after 4 days of hunger. He thought of the children in the line behind him. "Waiting for food. I will not stop," he said clearly. No one should be hungry when there is food to share. If that upsets your balance, then maybe your balance is wrong. The crowd murmured, some with fear, some with admiration. The officials looked at each other, then at Jonas. The reptilian gave a cold smile. "Very well," he said. "You will regret this." They turned and left, their footsteps echoing on the metal floor. That evening, the mood in the human quarters was heavy. Jonas sat with his fellow humans around a small table eating a simple meal. His friend Mara, a short woman with bright eyes, leaned forward. "They gave a warning today," Jonas told her. "I don't think they will stop at words." Mara nodded. "They fear what you started. But Jonas, what you did was right. I saw the children today. They had color in their cheeks again. Do you know how rare that is here?" Another human, Eli, sighed. "Right or not, we have to be careful. If they decide to punish us, they could shut down the stall. Then no one gets food." Jonas stared at the table. "I know. But if we give in now, then everything we've done means nothing." The room fell into silence. Each human knew the risk. Yet none suggested truly stopping. Meanwhile, in the lower decks of the station, Lyra spoke with other refugees. She told them how the humans worked side by side with her, how they shared without asking anything in return. Her words gave them strength. One old refugee said, "I thought we were forgotten, but perhaps not all see us as shadows." Another added, "If humans can share food, maybe we too can share something, even if small." Soon refugees began helping more. Some cleaned the area around the stall. Others offered scraps of cloth, small tools, or even stories and songs while waiting in line. It became more than just a food line. It became a community. But the more the humans gave, the angrier the wealthy merchants became. A tall avian merchant shouted in the council hall, "If this continues, the poor will never respect the old ways. They will expect handouts from all of us. Trade will lose its meaning." Another alien added, "Humans bring dangerous ideas. Compassion leads to weakness. Weakness leads to collapse." Not everyone agreed. A quiet insectoid spoke. "Or perhaps compassion leads to strength. Look at the humans. They have few ships, little wealth, yet their actions have moved the whole station. Is that weakness?" The debate grew heated. Some wanted the humans expelled. Others wanted to watch and see. But all agreed on one thing: the humans could not be ignored. One morning, as Jonas prepared the shared pot, he noticed more guards than usual patrolling the market. Their eyes swept over the crowd, their hands near their weapons, though no one had broken the rules. The refugees grew nervous, but still they came. Hunger was stronger than fear. Lyra stood beside Jonas, ladling stew into bowls. She whispered, "They want to frighten us." Jonas nodded. "Then we show them we are not afraid." Kieran, carrying water, looked at the guards with wide eyes. He whispered, "Will they take the food away?" Jonas knelt beside him and smiled gently. "No, Kieran. As long as I am here, there will be food." The boy's eyes lit with trust. That trust gave Jonas the strength to continue, even with the guards watching. By the end of the day, something surprising happened. A merchant who had once shouted against Jonas approached the stall. He was an older reptilian, his clothes worn but still neat. He placed a small bag of grain on the counter. "For your shared pot," he said simply, then walked away. The crowd gasped. It was the first time another merchant had openly supported the humans. Jonas smiled, his heart lifting. The ripple was spreading further than even he expected. That night, Jonas lay awake again, thinking about what had happened. He knew the officials would not let this continue without action, but he also knew something powerful had begun. Refugees were no longer invisible. Strangers were beginning to question old beliefs, and all of it had started with a single bowl of stew. Across the station, in rooms and corridors, stories were being told. The humans stood against the officials. They said no child should go hungry. Even when threatened, they did not stop. To some, the humans were dangerous dreamers. To others, they were a spark of hope. Either way, the galaxy was starting to notice. The following week, a shadow fell over Drayloth Station. The supply ships that usually arrived every few days did not come. At first, the merchants believed it was only a delay. But as more days passed, fear began to spread. Without the ships, the market could not refill its stores. Food prices rose almost overnight. A loaf of bread that cost 1 credit now cost 5. A small bag of grain, once affordable to workers, became too expensive for anyone but the rich. The wealthy merchants locked their storerooms, guarding their supplies with hired watchmen. The poor, already struggling, now faced empty bowls. Jonas Hale noticed the change immediately. His own stock of vegetables and grains, usually bought from traders, was shrinking fast. He and his fellow humans had only enough to last a few more days. He knew they could not keep feeding everyone as before. Mara, his friend, looked at the near-empty shelves. "Jonas, if we give all this away, we will have nothing left for ourselves." Jonas sighed. "I know. But if we keep it only for ourselves, what will happen to the children who come tomorrow?" Eli, sitting nearby, shook his head. "The officials want us to stop. If we run out, they will say it proves we were foolish." Jonas stirred the last pot of stew, thinking. He remembered Kieran's smile when he ate for the first time. He remembered the way Lyra bowed. Her eyes filled with tears of relief. He remembered the old reptilian merchant quietly leaving grain for the shared pot. Maybe, Jonas said slowly, this is the test. Anyone can share when there is plenty. The real question is, can we share when there is little? The next day, the market was different. Merchants stood proudly behind piles of food they refused to sell except at outrageous prices. Guards kept watch over angry crowds. Fights nearly broke out between those who could pay and those who could not. But at the human stall, things were quieter. Jonas and Mara served smaller bowls, stretching their food as far as they could. They ate nothing themselves that day, saving every bite for others. Lyra noticed and whispered, "You have not eaten." Jonas smiled faintly. "Today, the people need it more than I do." Word spread quickly. While others hoarded, the humans still shared. The crowd around their stall grew larger. Some came in desperation, others out of curiosity, and many came because they could not believe what they heard. Humans giving food freely even when supplies were almost gone. By the third day without supply ships, tension reached its peak. The wealthy merchants gathered in the council hall arguing loudly. "This chaos is because of the humans," shouted an avian merchant. "They encourage the poor to expect handouts." A reptilian replied, "No, it is because you hoard food. Look outside. The humans are feeding strangers with their last grain while you guard full storerooms." The council erupted in noise. Some demanded the humans be expelled. Others demanded the merchants open their stores. The officials, caught in the middle, struggled to decide. That evening, the shared pot at Jonas's stall was nearly empty. Only a thin soup remained. A crowd still waited, their eyes filled with hunger. Jonas knew he could not feed them all. His chest felt heavy with the weight of their hope. Then something unexpected happened. Lyra stepped forward. Her voice, though soft, carried across the crowd. 4 days, she said. 4 days my child had no food. I begged for scraps, and no one saw me. But the humans saw. They gave when no one else would. Because of them, my child lives. She lifted Kieran into her arms. The boy, though still thin, smiled shyly at the crowd. Lyra continued, her voice stronger now. I was invisible until they looked at me. I was hopeless until they gave me hope. And I tell you all, if they, with so little, can share, then why not us? Why not you? The crowd grew silent. Faces turned from her to the human stall, then to each other. An old insectoid worker slowly stepped forward. He carried a small bag of dried roots. His voice clicked softly. This is all I have. Add it to the pot. Then another came, a young reptilian woman holding 2 pieces of bread. I will share too. One by one, others stepped forward. A miner offered half his lunch. A mechanic brought a handful of preserved beans. Even children carried small things, crumbs, scraps, anything they could give. Jonas stood frozen, his chest tight with emotion. For the first time, the pot filled not only with human supplies, but with gifts from many hands. It was no longer a human pot. It was everyone's pot. When they served the stew that night, it was richer than it had been in days. People laughed as they ate, some crying quietly with relief. Strangers shared benches, talking for the first time. Hunger was still there, but so was something stronger, unity. News of the event spread across the station faster than fire. The humans shared their last food, people whispered, and then the people shared too. For the wealthy merchants, this was dangerous. If the poor learned they could survive without bowing to wealth, the old order would crumble. But for ordinary workers and refugees, it was hope. The officials watched carefully. They had warned Jonas before, yet now they saw hundreds working together peacefully because of him. Punishing the humans now might create more unrest than allowing them to continue. For the first time, the officials hesitated. That night, Jonas sat with Mara, Eli, and Lyra by the stall. Kieran slept nearby, curled up in a blanket. Mara said softly, I thought today we would run out, but instead we had more than ever. Lyra smiled. Because you showed us how. You reminded us what we had forgotten. Jonas looked around at the quiet market. the empty bowls stacked neatly, the faint smell of stew still in the air. It wasn't just us, he said. Today everyone gave, that's what matters. Eli leaned back, sighing. Do you realize what you've done, Jonas? This isn't just about food anymore. You've changed how people think. Jonas shook his head. Not me, all of us. A single bowl can start a story. But it takes many bowls to make a change. In the days that followed, the pot continued to fill. Not always with much, but always with something. Workers brought small offerings, merchants with kinder hearts added what they could spare, and the humans kept cooking. The stall had become more than a place to eat. It had become a symbol. It showed that compassion could exist even in a galaxy ruled by trade. It showed that hope could grow even in the darkest times, and every time Kieran laughed while helping carry bowls, or every time Lyra smiled as she stirred the pot, people were reminded of the beginning, the day a starving mother had begged for scraps and a human had answered not with leftovers, but with kindness. The supply ships finally returned on the 12th day. The market cheered, and the wealthy merchants reopened their stores. Prices slowly returned to normal. Yet something had changed forever. Because now, the people of Drayloth Station knew another way was possible. They had seen it, with their own eyes, tasted it with their own mouths. The story of the shared pot would not be forgotten. For Jonas, it was never about glory. He only wanted no child to go hungry. But without meaning to, he had lit a fire in the hearts of many. A fire that would keep burning, even after the crisis ended. Months passed on Drayloth Station, yet the memory of the human stall lingered like a quiet, persistent light. The crisis of the delayed supply ships was over, yet its lessons were permanent. The market was busier than ever, and food was once again abundant. But something had shifted. No longer did the poor hide in shadowed corners. They stood openly in the marketplace, confident that kindness could exist, that help could come, and that their lives had value. Jonas Hale and his fellow humans continued their work at the stall, but now it was more than a place for meals. Had become a gathering place, a symbol of hope. Every day more people came, not just for food, but to share stories, help each other, and build connections across species. Lyra and Kieran had become part of this story in a permanent way. Lyra helped organize the daily cooking schedule, teaching others how to prepare simple meals that could stretch to feed many. Kieran carried water, cleaned tables, and even helped guide the youngest children in the line. Both mother and child had grown stronger, healthier, and happier. One morning, Jonas noticed something unusual. A group of young alien workers approached, carrying baskets of food they had grown themselves in small station gardens. They had never been part of the crowd before, and their faces were nervous. "We want to help," one said, an insectoid with delicate wings. "We heard the story of your pot. We want to share too." Jonas smiled broadly. "Then help. That's all it takes." Soon, others joined in. The old reptilian merchant who had once quietly contributed grain began offering more. Even some of the wealthy merchants who had at first scorned Jonas's generosity began to observe in silence, curious about the human approach. It was a small shift at first, subtle but powerful. Humans had shown that giving was not weakness, it was strength. Word of the shared human meals spread beyond Drayloth Station. Traders carried the story to nearby stations and planets. Some aliens laughed at first, calling humans naive. Others were curious. And many began to wonder if humanity's power did not lie in ships, weapons, or wealth, but in the courage to act with compassion. Jonas did not care for the praise. He had never wanted fame. But the ripple of kindness was undeniable. Across the system, humans were being remembered not for conquering worlds, but for feeding children who had nothing. The Council of Drayloth Station met again. This time, discussions were different. Officials debated the humans not as troublemakers, but as examples. "Perhaps," said one elder reptilian, "we have underestimated humans. They have little, Yet they inspire more loyalty and respect than any of our merchants or soldiers ever could. An avian official nodded. Their strength is not in what they possess, but in what they give. That is something new to this galaxy. Other council members remained cautious, but they could not deny the results. Hunger had decreased. Conflict had diminished. Communities had begun to form. A new way of life was quietly taking root. Lyra and her child became known to many in the station as symbols of hope. She spoke often to families and workers, reminding them of the day Jonas had handed her a warm meal. "You see what kindness can do?" she would ask. "One simple act can change lives. One meal can bring hope. And when we share, we grow stronger together." Kieran, no longer weak or hungry, walked proudly among the children, teaching them small tasks, helping them learn that they mattered. He often carried water or washed bowls, smiling at everyone around him. The boy had learned that even the smallest contributions mattered. Jonas watched all of this quietly, feeling a deep satisfaction. He knew humanity's place among the stars was still uncertain. Ships, technology, and trade were important. But what humans offered that others often did not was something that could not be measured in credits or weight: care, courage, and compassion. He remembered the words he had whispered to Kieran months ago. "As long as I am here, there will be food." Now he understood that it was more than food. It was a promise that humans could act where others would not, that they could inspire without force, and that their presence alone could awaken the best in others. News arrived from a neighboring station. Traders had shared the story of the shared pot, of humans feeding the hungry even when supplies were low. It inspired small acts of kindness on distant worlds. People began planting gardens, sharing food with strangers, and helping neighbors in ways they had not thought possible. A new saying began to circulate quietly among traders and workers: "If humans will give when they have little, then who will not give when they have plenty?" The phrase carried power. It reminded aliens that strength was not always in force or money. Sometimes strength was in the courage to help. One quiet evening, Jonas sat with Mara watching the sun's soft glow through the station's observation windows. "Do you ever worry," Mara asked, "that all this attention could bring trouble? That officials or merchants may strike back?" Jonas shook his head slowly. "I do not fear them. Humans are not the strongest in ships or weapons, but I believe that what we have built here, trust, hope, compassion, is stronger than fear. It lasts longer than anger, and it spreads farther than force." Mara smiled. "You might be right. You may have changed this place forever." Jonas smiled back, thinking of Lyra and Kieran, of the children laughing while sharing food, and of the quiet ripple that had grown into a wave across the station. Months later, a visitor from another system came to Drayloth Station. A young ambassador from a distant planet had heard the story of humans feeding the hungry. She visited the stall to see it herself. "What do you feed these people with?" she asked Jonas, genuinely curious. Jonas smiled. "Not just food. We feed hope. We feed trust. And we remind people that no one is invisible." The ambassador nodded slowly. "I have seen many powerful species, but this is stronger than any fleet or weapon," Jonas thought quietly. He had never wanted recognition, but he realized now that humanity had a unique gift. The galaxy could measure power with ships, credits, or armies, but humans measured power by what they chose to give, and that choice could change worlds. Lyra approached Jonas, holding Kieran's hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. You saved more than my child's life. You reminded everyone here that we matter." Jonas shook his head. "You saved yourselves too, Lyra. You shared what you had, even when it was little. That is what made this place alive." Kieran smiled, holding a small bowl of stew he had helped serve. "We all helped," he said simply. Jonas laughed, a soft, proud sound. "Yes, Kieran. We all helped. And that is the greatest strength anyone can have." By the end of the year, Drayloth Station was transformed. The market bustled, but it was no longer only about trade. Refugees and workers had formed small communities helping each other, sharing resources, and learning that compassion was not weakness. The humans continued their work, quietly inspiring, quietly leading. They did not take power. They showed what it looked like to give it away. And somewhere in the galaxy the story traveled further, of the human who handed a starving child a meal, of the mother who wept with relief, and of the child who learned to smile again. It was a story that would be told again and again. No one is too small to matter. No one is too weak to help. And sometimes the greatest power in the galaxy is simply to care.